hope everyone's really well. It is a beautiful, beautiful day out there today. So hopefully you'll get your little bit of time out in the sunshine just to feel it on your face and your skin, feel a bit more human. So I'm thinking that I am now live on Facebook and on Instagram. Hooray! I'm getting one with the technology. It's not for me. So I'm not very good at the camera thing though. Sometimes I'll look at the Instagram camera, sometimes I'll look at the Facebook camera. It can all be a bit of a disaster, so just bear with me, okay? I've got lots of stories with me today, and I've got some poems as well because I can choose, and I love poetry. But as I've said to you before, if there's something that you would really love me to read, if I've got it, then I can nip to the shop and go and grab it, or it might be in the front room anyway because our house looks like a bookshop. So you never know, I might have it. So I hope everyone is sitting nice and comfy and they are ready. This is the first one for today. It's from this little book called When We Were Very Young, so it is very, very old, by the wonderful A.A. Milne and E.H. Shepherd. And the reason that I've chosen this one is because my mum read these poems to me over and over again when I was small and knew them off by heart. And then I read them so much that my original copy disintegrated completely, and it is now in a little frame, and my lovely hubby Jim bought me a new old copy just for me. So this one is called Disobedience, and I'm guessing at the moment that the people that are being the most disobedient children are probably your grown-ups. Hello Ada. So, you ready? James Morrison, Weatherby George Dupree, took great care of his mother, though he was only 3. James said to his mother, "Mother," said he, "you must never go down to the end of town if you don't go down with me." James Morrison's mother put on a golden gown. James Morrison's mother said to herself, said she, "I can get right down to the end of town and be back in time for tea." King John put up a notice, "Lost or stolen or strayed. James Morrison's mother seems to have been mislaid. Last seen wandering vaguely, quite of her own accord. She tried to get down to the end of the town. 40 shillings reward." The beautiful pictures from E.H. Shepherd. Love them. I love them. James Morrison, commonly known as Jim, told his other relations not to go blaming him. James said to his mother, "Mother," he said he, "you must never go down to the end of town without consulting me." James Morrison's mother hasn't been heard of since. King John said he was sorry. So did the Queen and the Prince. King John, somebody told me, said to a man he knew, "If people go down to the end of town, well, what can anyone do?" James Morrison took great care of his mother, though he was only 3. James said to his mother, "Mother," said he, "you must never go down to the end of town if you don't go down with me." Very, very bossy 3-year-old. I don't know if any of you have got bossy 3-year-olds at the moment. I'm sure you haven't. Okay, right, so we've gone from quite highbrow to lowbrow. Pooh! I love this book, and I know that lots of you know it already. And I'm not going to apologise for how silly it is, or the fact that your children will probably end up shouting poo bum quite a lot. So it's written and illustrated by Stephanie Blake, and it's published by Gecko Press. It's been on Milkshake quite a few times, I think. It's a super popular one. And whenever we do parties in the bookshop, Jim likes to read this to the children to rile them up before I have to kind of pull them back in again to do something a bit more sensible. Ready? Ready. Here he is. Woo, wrong way. See, I told you I can't do the camera thing. Once there was a little rabbit who could only say one thing. Pooh Bum! Every morning, when his mother said, "Time to get up, my little rabbit," he would reply, "Pooh Bum!" At lunchtime, when his father said, "Eat your spinach, my little rabbit," he would reply, "Pooh Bum!" I mean spinach. At night, when his big sister said, "Come and have your bath, my little rabbit," he would reply, "Pooh, Mum!" One day, a wolf asked him, "Ooh, may I eat you, little rabbit?" And he replied, "Pooh, Mum!" Says the wolf. And so the wolf ate the little rabbit. When the wolf went home, his wife asked, "How are you, my dear?" The wolf replied, "Pooh, Mum!" Oh. That night, the wolf wasn't feeling well. Oh, he called a doctor. The doctor said, "Say, ah." The wolf replied, "Pooh, Mum!" The doctor cried, "What? You've eaten my little rabbit?" Uh-oh. The very brave doctor went looking for his rabbit. He pulled the little rabbit out and said, "Oh, my little Pooh, Mum!" The little rabbit was quite shocked. He exclaimed, "Oh, good heavens, father! How dare you call me that? You know perfectly well that my name is Simon." Back at home, his mother said, "Eat your soup, my little rabbit." He replied, "Of course, mother. The flavour is exquisite." The next morning, when his father said, "Brush your teeth, little rabbit," he replied, "Fart." It's a funny one. I love that one. It's just genius in every way. Okay, should we go a bit more serious now? I'm going to share this one with you. Now, some children I've read them to this already last week because we're doing some stuff on Zoom. So I apologise if you're tuning in and you're going to get the same story, but I love this story. So this is Little Frieda, and it's illustrated and written by Anthony Brown, who was just, was Anthony Brown. I mean, what more can you say? And it's published by Walker Books, and it's all about Frieda Kahlo, who I love as well. I just think the pictures are amazing. So hopefully I can do it justice when I show them to you, and you'll be able to see all of the strange and unusual things in Anthony Brown's pictures. I'll show you this picture first. There's Frieda. Ooh. Lots of weird cactuses going on there. Cacti. This is told first person, so Frieda is telling her own story. When I was 6, I fell ill with polio and had to stay in bed for 9 months. It was extremely painful, and when I eventually got better, I could only walk slowly with a limp. Other children laughed and made fun of me, calling me peg leg whenever I walked past. I tried to hide my thin right leg with 3 layers of socks, but it didn't fool anybody. I was different, and being different made me an outsider. My father was a photographer, and sometimes he let me help him in his studio. I coloured up many of his black and white photographs. Although it was boring work, I loved being with him. Most days, though, in spite of having 3 sisters, I played on my own. I was lonely. I quite liked being separate. Here she is with her dad. You can see she's colouring in the photographs. So clever. But there are some typical Anthony Brown things going on in this photo. So I don't know if you can see in the camera here, there's an eyeball looking out at you. It's beautiful. I highly recommend. If you've not got into Anthony Brown books, that's your homework. When I slept, I dreamt of flying. I longed to really fly. I thought about it all the time. And for my 7th birthday, I asked my parents for a toy plane. For days, I could think of nothing else but flying right around the world. Here's Frieda in her imaginary fruit plane. Looks pretty good to me. But when the day finally came, these wings were all I got. I didn't want to show my disappointment, so I kept the stupid wings on and ran to my room. As I breathed on the window, it slowly became misty with condensation. I idly drew a shape on the glass with my finger. Then I added a handle, and suddenly it was a door. I opened the door and stepped through it. I was free. I could run. I ran and ran and ran until I was completely exhausted. I was hot and very thirsty, and there in front of me was a dairy. I walked all around the building looking for a way in, but I couldn't find one. Just when I was about to give up and go home, I noticed a little door, and I crawled inside. And then I seemed to be falling slowly down into the depths of the earth. At the bottom, a girl was waiting for me. She didn't say anything, not even hello, but in a strange way, I felt as if I'd known her all my life. I smiled at her, and she smiled too. The girl silently started to dance. She was a beautiful dancer, and while she gracefully danced around the room, I talked to her. I told her all the secret things I worried about. There were many, and she listened to every word I said. The girl was a stranger, but she felt so familiar. We sat and laughed together. I laughed very loudly, and she laughed without making a sound. We quickly became the closest friends. I'd never had a friend before. It was a wonderful feeling. After a while, I knew I had to go. We waved goodbye, and I flew back home, away from the dairy, across the plains, and through the door drawn on the window. I rubbed out the door and ran to the furthest corner of the garden. She's just flying, just like she wanted to. I sat there and thought about my journey and my new friends. I was alone again, but now I was very happy. I knew that I could go back and see her whenever I wanted. She would be there waiting for me. From that day, I began to paint the girl over and over again. I visited her many times since that day, and in a way, I've been painting her ever since. I'll show you that photo. So this painting is really clever because Anthony Brown has taken a painting that Frieda really did do, and he's changed it a little bit. She did paint herself surrounded by all of these beautiful animals and plants. It's just gorgeous. That's the end of Little Frieda. Okay, should we go back to Silly? Let's go back. This one is very old as well. And I can tell that it's old because it's got a stamp inside it. I don't know if you can see. It says, this book belongs to N. Radford. And then there's a number up in the corner. Because when I was a teacher in East London, in my first class, I used to have loads of books of my own that the children could borrow. So this was book number 256 that they could borrow. And that was a long time ago. So this one is called The True Story of the Three Little Pigs. And it's told by John Sieska, and it's illustrated by Lane Smith. It was published by Puffin back in the day. I don't know if it's still in print, to be honest. If it's not, once the libraries reopen, go and get this book because it's hilarious. So I shall read you this one. This is kind of more my level of silliness. Ready? Everybody knows the story of the Three Little Pigs, right? Or at least they think they do. But I'll let you into a little secret. Nobody knows the real story because nobody has ever heard my side. I'm the wolf, Alexander T. Wolf. Yes? You can call me Al. I don't know how this whole big bad wolf thing got started, but it's all wrong. Maybe it's because of our diet. Hey, it's not my fault. Wolves eat cute little animals like bunnies and sheep and pigs. That's just the way we are. If cheeseburgers were cute, folks would probably think you were big and bad too. But like I was saying, the whole big bad wolf thing is all wrong. The real story is about a sneeze and a cup of sugar. This is the real story. Way back in Once Upon a Time, I was making a birthday cake for my dear old granny. I had a terrible sneezing cold, and I ran out of sugar. So I went next door to see if I could get a cup of sugar. Now, the guy next door was a pig, and he wasn't too bright either. He had built his house out of straw. Can you believe it? I mean, who in his right mind would build a house out of straw? So, of course, the minute I knocked on the door, it fell right in. I didn't want to just walk into somebody else's house, so I called, little pig, are you in? No answer. I was just about to go home without my cup of sugar for my dear old granny's birthday cake. That's when my nose started to itch. I felt a sneeze coming on. Well, I huffed, and I snuffed, and I sneezed the greatest sneeze. And you know what? The whole darn straw house fell down, flat. And right in the middle of the pile of straw was the first little pig, dead as a doornail. He'd been home the whole time. Now, it seemed like a shame to leave a perfectly good ham for dinner lying there in the straw, so I ate it up. Think of it as a big cheeseburger, just lying there. I was feeling a little better, but I still didn't have my cup of sugar, so I went to the next house. The guy who lived there was the first pig's brother. He was a little smarter, but not much. He had built his house out of sticks. I rang the bell on the stick house. Nobody answered. I called, Mr. Pig, are you in? He yelled back, go away, wolf, you can't come in. I'm shaving the hairs on my chinny chin. I just grabbed the doorknob when I felt another sneeze coming on. I huffed, and I snuffed, and I tried to cover my mouth, but I sneezed a great sneeze. Achoo! And you're not going to believe it, but this guy's house fell down just like his brother's. When the dust settled, there was the second little pig, dead as a doornail. Wolf's honour? Now, you know the wolf will spoil if you just leave it out in the open. So I did the only thing there was to do. I had dinner again. Think of it as a second helping. I was getting awfully full, but my cold was feeling a lot better. I still didn't have that cup of sugar though for my dear old granny's birthday cake, so I went to the next house. This guy was the first and second little pig's big brother. He must have been the brains of the family, because he'd built his house out of bricks. I knocked on the brick house. No answer. I called, Mr. Pig, are you in? And do you know what that rude little porker answered? Get out of here, wolf! Don't bother me again. Talk about impolite. He probably had a whole sack full of sugar, and he wouldn't even give me one little cup for my dear old sweet granny's birthday cake. What a pig! I was just about to go home and maybe make a nice birthday card instead of a cake when I felt my cold coming on again. I huffed, and I snuffed, and I sneezed again. Achoo! The third little pig yelled, and your old granny can sit on a pin. Now, I'm usually a pretty calm fellow, but when somebody talks about my granny like that, I go a little crazy. When the cops drove up, of course, I was trying to break down this pig's door, and the whole time I was huffing and puffing and sneezing and making a real scene. The rest, as they say, is history. The news reporters found out about the two pigs I'd had for dinner. They figured a sick guy going to borrow a cup of sugar didn't sound very exciting. So they jazzed up the story with all that huff and puff and blow your house down nonsense, and they made me the big bad wolf. That's it, the real story. I was framed. But maybe you could loan me a cup of sugar? Can you believe him? Maybe. Okay. What did I think? We'll see how the time goes. Another old one. Now, it says on the front of this one that it's 30 years old, but I think it's older than that now, which again is disturbing. So this is the Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch by Rhonda and David Armitage, and this one is published by Scholastic. It's a good classic. And I love it. So there's the lighthouse. Ooh. No, there's the lighthouse. And there's their house up on top of the hill. Once there was a lighthouse keeper with Mr. Grinling. At night time he lived in a small white cottage perched high on the cliffs. In the daytime he rode out to his lighthouse on the rocks to clean and polish the lights. Mr. Grinling was a most industrious lighthouse keeper, and rain or shine, he tended his lights. There he is in a storm and in the sunshine. Sometimes at night, as Mr. Grinling lay sleeping in his warm bed, the ships would toot to tell him that his lights were shining brightly and clearly out to sea. Each morning, while Mr. Grinling polished the lights, Mrs. Grinling worked in the kitchen of the little white cottage on the cliffs, concocting a delicious lunch for him. Once she had prepared the lunch, she packed it into a special basket and clipped it onto a wire that ran from the little white cottage to the lighthouse on the rocks. There she is, being very, very busy. It goes all the way down the wire. Ooh. But one Monday, something terrible happened. Mr. Grinling had prepared a particularly appetising lunch. This looks amazing. A mixed seafood salad, a lighthouse sandwich, cold chicken garni, sausages and crisps, peach surprise, iced sea biscuits, drinks and assorted fruit. She put the lunch in the basket as usual and sent it down the wire. But the lunch did not arrive. It was spotted by 3 scavenging seagulls, who set upon it and devoured it with great gusto. "Clear off, you varlets!" shouted Mr. Grinling, but the seagulls took not the slightest notice. "This is an excellent peach surprise, boys." "Ah, she's a great cook, Fred." "Scrumptious lunch, Tom." That evening, Mr. and Mrs. Grinling decided on a plan to baffle the seagulls. "Tomorrow I shall tie the napkin to the basket," said Mrs. Grinling. "Of course, my dear," agreed Mr. Grinling. "A sound plan." "Oh, they'll have to try harder than that to stop us, Bert." These seagulls are clever. On Tuesday, Mr. and Mrs. Grinling racked their brains for another plan. "They're a brazen lot, these seagulls," said Mrs. Grinling. "Brazen indeed," said Mr. Grinling. "What shall we do?" "Our cat does not appear to like seagulls," said Mrs. Grinling. "No, my dear," said Mr. Grinling. "Hamish is an accomplished seagull chaser." "Of course," exclaimed Mrs. Grinling. "Tomorrow Hamish can guard the lunch." "A most ingenious plan," agreed Mr. Grinling. Hamish did not think this plan was ingenious at all. He spat and he hissed as Mrs. Grinling secured him in the basket. "There, there, Hamish," said Mrs. Grinling consolingly. "I'll have a tasty piece of herring waiting for you when you arrive home." Sadly, Flying did not agree with Hamish. Look at his little face. Poor Hamish. His fur stood on end when the basket swayed, and his whiskers drooped when he peered down at the wet blue sea, and he felt much too sick to even notice the seagulls, let alone scare them away from lunch. "Pretty kitty, like a piece of lobster morn, eh? Oh, this food gets better every day, Fred. Aren't you going to chase us, kitty?" "Lack-a-day, lack-a-day," said Mr. Grinling sadly. "Meow, meow," agreed Hamish pitifully. On Wednesday evening, Mr. and Mrs. Grinling racked their brains again for a new plan. "What shall we do?" said Mr. Grinling. Mrs. Grinling looked thoughtful. "I have it," she exclaimed. "Just the mixture for a hungry seagull." "Indeed, my dear," said Mr. Grinling. "What have you in mind?" "Wait and see," said Mrs. Grinling. "Just wait and see." Aha! You can see that big pot of mustard? Mustard sandwiches, chuckled Mr. Grinling. A superb plan, my dear. Truly superb. On Thursday morning, Mrs. Grinling carefully packed the mustard sandwiches and sent them off down the wire to the expectant seagulls. Oh, yuck! Ugh! On Friday, Mrs. Grinling repeated the mustard mixture. All right, boys, let's go and have lunch elsewhere. It's the same as yesterday's lunch, Fred. So on Saturday, up in the little white cottage on the cliffs, a jubilant Mrs. Grinling put away the mustard pots before she prepared a scrumptious lunch for Mr. Grinling. While he waited for his lunch down in the lighthouse on the rocks, Mr. Grinling sang snatches of old sea shanties as he surveyed the coastline through his telescope. And this is what he saw. Look at those naughty seagulls. No mustard in this lot, Tom. We'll fly back here for lunch again tomorrow, boys. This is a delicious chocolate eclair, Fred. Oh, well, such is life, mused Mr. Grinling as he sat down to enjoy a leisurely lunch in the warm sunshine. Got his lunch in the end, didn't he? You could have lunch in the warm sunshine today if you've got a little bit of space to go outside. It's such a beautiful day. Okay, so this is our last story for today. Again, it's not a particularly new one, but it's really beautiful. It's published by Templar Publishing. It's called The Dragon Machine. Whoop. I will get a hang of this camera thing, I promise. And it's written by Helen Ward and illustrated by Wayne Anderson. The illustrations are just beautiful. They're so clever, so detailed. I'll show you the picture. There's a little boy there called George. I don't know if you can see what he's got with him. A little dragon. Wouldn't that be a cool pet? George noticed his first dragon on a wet Thursday. The more he looked, the more dragons he saw. Unseen, ignored and overlooked, the dragons went unnoticed, just like George. But there's lots and lots of them. They're everywhere. Ooh. Dragons perched on the telephone wires. They sat amongst the dustbins. They chased butterflies through the tulips. They played havoc with the cats. They sank the water lilies in the pond. George fed them delicious stale biscuits and smelly cheese. And then the trouble began. The dragons followed George everywhere. George spent more and more of his time cleaning up muddy footprints, tidying up untidiness, and saying sorry for breaking things he had not broken. George's dragons were becoming too troublesome to stay unnoticed for much longer. Something had to be done. George went in search of some advice. Oops. And where do you go for advice? The best place in the world? The library. The dragons followed George to the library. He consulted the Encyclopedia of Dragons. There were dire warnings: never feed a dragon, never let a dragon into your home. Too late. There were tragic tales of dragons discovered and captured. Too sad. And there was a map of the place where dragons belonged. A great wilderness, unnoticed and overlooked and safe. But George would have to show them the way. George drew plans for a machine. The machine had a beginning, a middle, and an end. An undercarriage and beautiful wings. George hammered in the last nail. He packed delicious stale biscuits and smelly cheese and himself into the dragon machine. The machine lumbered, engine ticking gently into the night sky, and the dragons followed. See how beautiful this machine is. Looks so cool. I think I would go in the dragon machine. The machine clicked and whirred over the sleeping town. It rattled and clunked over the moonlit fields and woods. The dragons followed. It clattered and banged and crashed into the great wilderness. The dragons followed. George was so tired he went to sleep in the wreckage of his dragon machine. By morning, all the dragons were gone. There was an emptiness all around and inside George. and an emptiness at home where George should have been. They searched the town. They searched the fields. They ventured into the great wilderness looking for George and found him among the broken pieces of his dragon machine. George and his dreams of dragons went home. Everyone was pleased to see George, and George was pleased to be back. He no longer went unseen, ignored and overlooked. They made him a huge cake to celebrate his return and gave him a dog as a present. There's the dog away. Does it look like a dog to you? Nobody else noticed that it wasn't a dog. There you go. Look at that for timing. Thank you so much for joining me again today. I hope you've enjoyed stories. It's been lovely reading them with you. I'll be back on Thursday, 9:30, for lots more stories. If you've got anything that you would really love me to read, then drop me a message and I'll see what I can do. I know, Elspeth, you would like me to read The Mouse or Cat, and I need to go and collect it from the shop because my copy is nowhere to be found at home. So I shall get it for you for Thursday, I promise. Take care of yourselves, everyone. Be well. Oh, it's going to take me a second to work out the cluster.